So, think about this. Nearly 70% of software developers, I mean, the people building the most complex, highly compensated infrastructure on the planet, are largely self-taught.
Right. Which is wild when you really think about it.
It is. They basically bypassed all the traditional institutional paths, yet they are quite literally programming our modern reality. So it makes you wonder, what do they know about the mechanics of the human mind that our structured schools just, well, don't?
Yeah, that single statistic, it forces a massive reevaluation of how we validate expertise in our culture today.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we're operating in this system that demands you sit in an accredited room for 4 years, right? Just to prove you possess the capacity to learn.
Right.
While simultaneously, we're relying on this global digital infrastructure built by people who simply, opened a laptop, embraced some extreme frustration, and just taught themselves.
It's crazy. Well, welcome to the Deep Dive. If you are listening to this right now, you are the learner.
Yeah.
You're that person who doesn't just want the surface level answer, you want the underlying architecture. And today, we have a mission that speaks directly to that drive.
We really do.
We were unpacking the whole concept of autodidactism. So the art, and more importantly, the underlying mechanics of self-directed learning.
And we've got a really compelling stack of analytical essays on the table today.
Yeah, we do, including this fascinating piece titled The Sovereign Learner, along with, several synthesized perspectives that all point to this one singular argument, that self-education is the ultimate unfair advantage in the modern world.
It really is. And the central paradox we are exploring today is that, well, we live in an era with unprecedented, frictionless access to information.
Frictionless. Literally all of it in our pockets.
Right. Yet we systematically undervalue the individual who actually takes the initiative to curate their own education.
Which is so backward.
It is. So this deep dive is really about reclaiming intellectual agency. It is about understanding the actual mechanics of why self-directed learning often produces a much more resilient, adaptable intellect than structured schooling does.
Yeah. And to understand why a self-taught mind is so powerful, we first have to look at the massive flaw in how society currently measures intelligence. The literature we're looking at describes this as the credential competence conflation.
That's a mouthful, but yeah.
It is a mouthful, but basically society has completely confused the map with the actual territory.
Exactly. I mean, a degree or a diploma, fundamentally, it's just a socially legible marker. It's a heuristic.
Well, it's a shortcut.
Yeah, large systems like massive corporate human resource departments, they need a fast, cheap way to filter thousands of applicants, right? They're filtering for general compliance and maybe a baseline exposure to a topic.
So that piece of paper, that's just the map showing where you've been.
Precisely. It demonstrates you can meet deadlines, follow a standardized syllabus, and, pass a standardized test.
But it absolutely does not measure the territory. Like how dynamically you think or what you can actually execute when the parameters of the real world inevitably change on you.
Right, because the real world doesn't have a syllabus.
Exactly. One of the essays actually puts this brutally well. It notes that a master's degree might amount to, quote, 40 pounds of vellum and 6 figures of debt.
Oh, wow. That hits hard.
Doesn't it? And yet the core knowledge often evaporates within months of the final exam.
Oh, yeah. We've all experienced that.
The cram and flush cycle. You just memorize the data long enough to pass the test, and your brain immediately discards it the second you walk out of the room.
Because there's no real utility for it anymore. And the thing is, this institutional monopoly on knowledge, it feels inevitable to us now, right? Like, it's always been this way.
But it hasn't.
No, it's actually a complete historical anomaly. I mean, the individuals who literally constructed our modern intellectual frameworks, think about Socrates, Shakespeare, Abraham Lincoln.
Michael Faraday. Leonardo da Vinci.
Thomas Edison. All of them left absolutely zero institutional paper trail.
Right. They built their foundations entirely outside the gates of the academy.
The shift toward credentialism only happened purely as society scaled. During the Industrial Revolution, we needed standardized workers for standardized tasks. So what did we do? We built standardized schools.
Makes sense for a factory.
Right. And institutions successfully marketed the idea that verified knowledge is the only legitimate knowledge.
They weaponized that legitimacy.
Exactly. They created this pervasive narrative where formal learning is safe and verified, while self-directed learning is somehow, eccentric or dangerous or strictly amateurish.
It's so wild to me. I was thinking about this. And relying purely on a degree to judge someone's competence, it's basically like looking at a restaurant's framed health inspection certificate instead of actually tasting the chef's food.
Huh, that is a perfect analogy.
Right, because the certificate just proves compliance. It proves the kitchen kept the fridge at 38 degrees and they stored the raw poultry on the bottom shelf.
Which is good. You want that.
You definitely want that.
Yeah.
But it proves absolutely nothing about whether or not that chef possesses actual culinary genius,
Yeah.
or understands flavor profiles, or can create a decent meal.
Right. And because massive bureaucratic systems can literally only see the health certificate, the autodidact remains totally invisible to the system.
Totally invisible.
Someone could be reading voraciously, running complex experiments in their garage, building world-class expertise in some niche field, but without that institutional stamp, they simply do not exist to the gatekeepers.
It's a shame. So if the map is this flawed, we have to examine how the self-taught individual navigates the actual territory.
Let's do it.
The core argument across these sources is that self-directed learning isn't just a quirky alternative. It is fundamentally a more efficient mechanical engine.
Yes, it shifts the entire paradigm.
Right, from just-in-case learning to just-in-time learning.
This is such a crucial distinction because institutional education relies almost entirely on that just-in-case model. You sit in a lecture hall, learning abstract concepts, memorizing formulas, studying these broad theoretical frameworks just in case you might need them 5 years from now.
For a hypothetical problem in a hypothetical job.
Exactly. And your brain has very little incentive to retain that information deeply because, well, there are no immediate stakes.
By the time you actually encounter the real-world problem, you've totally forgotten the formula. Or, especially in tech, the software industry has completely evolved, and the tool you spent a whole semester mastering is totally obsolete anyway.
Happens all the time. But autodidactism flips this entirely to a just-in-time model.
Meaning you aren't learning for a distant future.
Right. You are tethering your learning to immediate reality. You are trying to solve an urgent, high-leverage problem today. And this triggers what the literature calls the execution loop.
The execution loop. Walk us through that.
The mechanics of the execution loop are precisely what make the knowledge actually stick. You identify a real-world friction point. You go out and acquire the specific cognitive tool required to bypass that friction.
Right. You learn the exact thing you need.
Yes. Then you apply it immediately, and reality gives you instantaneous feedback.
It either works or it breaks.
Exactly. The tool becomes internalized because it was literally the only thing standing between you and the outcome you desperately needed. You don't forget it because it was tied to forward progress in that specific high-stakes moment.
And this allows for what the sources call radical curriculum customization.
Yes.
Because when you buy into a formal program, you are essentially buying a bloated, prepackaged cable bundle.
I love that comparison.
Right. You have to move at the speed of the academic board. You're forced to learn things you already know, or things you'll literally never need.
But the autodidact can just hyper-focus.
Exactly. Like, if you are building a recommendation engine and you need to understand algorithmic discovery, the specific mathematical models that predict what a user wants to see next based on past behavior.
Super specific.
Yeah, you can spend a solid month doing nothing but reading primary sources on that one exact subtopic. You aggressively prune out all the administrative fluff.
You just cut straight to the core.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because I want to push back a little here.
Go for it.
Sure, curiosity is a great motivator. But if I'm, say, building a suspension bridge or programming a pacemaker, I want the engineer to have studied physics compliance and foundational safety theory, not just followed their curiosity.
Oh, absolutely.
So if you are only ever learning things just in time to solve an immediate urgent problem, don't you risk just learning a bunch of cheap hacks? Like, you figure out the minimum required to fix the code, but you never actually understand the deep foundational theory of why it works.
That is probably the most vital critique of this model. It really is.
Right.
But it ultimately misunderstands the neurological driver of a true autodidact.
How so?
Well, if just-in-time learning stops at the superficial hack, yes, it is incredibly brittle. However, you have to look at the motivation. Formal education is driven by compliance. You learn to satisfy a syllabus, which utilizes short-term memory centers.
Cram and fly.
Exactly. But autodidactism is driven by curiosity. And neurobiologically, curiosity spikes dopamine.
Ah.
And dopamine acts as a literal save button for the brain's memory centers. So when a self-directed learner solves the immediate problem, their internal obsession drives them to ask, wait, why did that work?
So they don't just stop at the hack.
No, they naturally backtrack into the foundational theory because they want to manipulate the system even further.
That makes a lot of sense. So the immediate problem is basically just the entry point that pulls them down the rabbit hole.
Precisely. It creates a completely different relationship with the information itself.
Yeah, because formal education often produces knowledge you carry externally, like heavy luggage.
That's a great way to put it.
You just set it down the moment the final exam is over. But curiosity-driven self-education produces knowledge that becomes like fundamentally woven into the structural architecture of your brain.
And because autodidacts are forced to build these foundations from scratch, without a syllabus handing it to them, they develop these invisible cognitive superpowers that traditional schooling rarely even acknowledges.
Superpowers like metacognition,
Yes. Chief among them is metacognition.
which is essentially the ability to think about your own thinking. It is the meta skill of learning how to learn.
Exactly, because in structured environments, the institution provides all the scaffolding for you.
Right, they tell you what textbook to read, what chapter matters, how you'll be evaluated.
The cognitive load of organizing the learning is completely handled by the professor.
But the autodidact has to build their own scaffolding. They must develop specific heuristics to evaluate source quality learning, how to rapidly differentiate high-signal primary research from, shallow digital noise.
And more importantly, they have to diagnose their own blind spots.
Because there's no professor with a red pen.
Right. Without that professor wielding a red pen, they have to set up their own feedback loops. Like, a self-taught programmer has to actually run the script and let the compiler throw error codes to realize their logic is flawed.
They have to build stress tests to ensure they aren't just living in this illusion of competence.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We can contrast this with what the sources call the well-roundedness trap of formal schooling.
Yes, the well-roundedness trap.
Going through a highly structured curriculum is a bit like bowling with bumper rails.
Oh, I like this.
You throw the ball, it bounces off the rails, you knock down some pins, and you get a respectable score. But you never actually learn the meta skill of correcting your own aim.
Right, you just relied on the external bumpers to keep you out of the gutter.
Exactly. But the autodidact, they took the bumpers away on day one. They throw a lot of gutter balls initially, for sure.
So many gutter balls.
But they are the only ones actually learning the underlying physics of the lane.
That's spot on. And without those rails, they become what the literature calls intellectual silo busters.
Silo busters.
Yeah, because academic specialization, it creates incredibly deep but completely isolated silos.
Right. You're either a math person or an arts person.
Exactly. You are trained to view the world exclusively through the narrow lens of your specific department. You are categorized strictly as a programmer or an economist or a designer.
But the autodidact completely ignores those arbitrary boundaries.
They don't even see them. They cross-pollinate wildly different disciplines based purely on where their execution loop takes them.
Like, imagine someone combining finance, behavioral psychology, and minimalist design.
Right, a totally weird mix in a university setting.
Very weird. But with that, you don't just become a well-rounded student with a few electives. You become an adaptable specialist capable of building financial applications that are neurobiologically addictive and visually flawless.
Yes, true. Paradigm-shifting innovation almost always happens at the intersection of unrelated fields.
Exactly.
And what's fascinating here is that because self-directed learning is entirely invisible, that there are no grades or progress reports published along the way, society completely misattributes the sudden world-class result to natural talent.
Oh man, all the time.
People see the output, like that beautifully designed financial app we just talked about, and they assume the creator is simply a born genius.
It just popped out of the womb coding.
Right. They completely miss the underlying architecture of obsessive, relentless self-education that took place in the dark.
So if autodidactism is this powerful, if it builds metacognition and drives silo-busting innovation like we're saying, we have to confront the obvious counter-argument.
Which is?
Why doesn't everyone just do it? The reality is, stepping outside the system comes with severe friction, genuine risks, and a massive psychological toll.
We absolutely must acknowledge the hard limitations here. First, there are gate-kept professions, which we touched on earlier.
Pacemaker in the bridge.
Exactly. You cannot self-teach your way into a medical license or a law practice. The societal liability is just way too high, and we require institutional verification for a reason.
Sure. Pure autodidactism cannot substitute for credentialed entry in those specific fields.
Right. And there is also the very real danger of missing foundational concepts. When you build your own curriculum, you simply don't know what you don't know.
You could easily bypass a critical opposing viewpoint simply because the algorithm never fed it to you.
Exactly. But the most significant barrier explored in our materials is what is termed the loneliness tax.
The loneliness tax, that sounds heavy.
It is heavy. Formal education brilliantly bundles the act of learning with a massive social architecture.
Right, you go to a campus.
You get peers, you get cohort momentum, artificial deadlines, shared rituals. Humans are profoundly social creatures, and our brains actively use social pressure to regulate our cognitive stamina.
Wow, yeah. When you learn alone, you pay that tax every single day.
Every single day. The cognitive load of regulating your own focus, persisting through deep confusion, motivating yourself across plateaus without a cohort dragging you forward, it is exhausting.
We often mistake our biological need for social structure as a requirement of the cognitive act of learning itself.
That's exactly it. The autodidact has to generate their own momentum in a vacuum, which requires a staggering amount of emotional resilience.
And then, even if you survive the loneliness tax, you slam right into the market failure.
The HR filters.
Yes. Employers strongly prefer the cheap filter of a degree over the expensive evaluation of actual competence.
Because it takes a hiring manager 2 seconds to scan a resume for a university name.
But it takes hours to properly evaluate a self-taught candidate's GitHub repository or their design portfolio.
Right.
So let me ask you this. If the economic system is fundamentally rigged against the self-taught expert-like, if the resume screening software is literally designed to filter you out, isn't it economically safer to just play the credential game, even if the actual learning is less durable?
This raises an important question, and it really probes the psychological core of the autodidact.
Yeah.
Yes, it is economically safer in the short term to acquire the credential. But navigating that barrier, it acts as a filter for extreme resilience.
A filter for resilience.
It requires immense self-trust to override the dominant institutional narrative that tells you you are only allowed to learn what you have been given permission to learn.
You have to consciously decide that your curiosity is a more reliable compass than a standardized syllabus.
Even when the market is screaming at you to just get back in line.
Which is hard.
Extremely hard. But the people who push through that friction, they develop a quality of adaptability that no curriculum can ever manufacture.
Which brings us to the ultimate question for the modern learner. Knowing the invisible superpowers we've talked about and the crushing hidden costs, how do you actually execute this?
Right. How do you become undeniable in today's world?
We are navigating a historically unprecedented shift right now. The internet has essentially made the sum total of recorded human knowledge available for free.
It's unbelievable. The bottleneck is absolutely no longer access.
So what does this all mean? It's basically like every single human being has been handed the master keys to the greatest, most expansive library in the history of the world.
Right.
You can walk into any room, read any manuscript, consult literally any expert. Yet the vast majority of us are choosing to sit in the lobby watching cartoons on our phones.
Yes. The divide is now civilizational, but it is entirely internal.
Internal.
The staggering gap is between those who use this access for passive consumption, scrolling algorithmic feeds for cheap dopamine hits, and those who weaponize it for sovereign education.
It is fundamentally a crisis of agency.
It is. But for those who do turn the key, the results are completely reshaping industries.
Returning to that initial statistic we talked about.
Right. Roughly 69% of software developers being self-taught. They are proving that this model works at scale in one of the most intellectually demanding fields on the planet.
And it's not just Silicon Valley either.
Not at all. Autodidactism is quietly powering massive economic hustle in places like Jakarta, where individuals are rapid cycling through side skills just to survive in a highly volatile economy.
So how do we actually apply this? Because the literature lays out some really concrete mechanical strategies to mitigate the risks we've discussed.
Let's hear them.
First, you must combine structure with freedom. Since you lack a syllabus, you basically have to engineer your own milestones.
Right. You can't just read aimlessly.
Exactly. You have to tether the learning to a project-based timeline. If you want to learn Python, don't just read a textbook. Commit to building a functional web scraper by Friday.
Put stakes on it.
Yeah.
And second, you must aggressively seek external validation to bypass those corporate filters we mentioned.
Manufacture the signal.
Exactly. If the market needs a signal, manufacture one. Translate your invisible learning into a legible format.
Like contributing to open source work, or publishing your case studies, or passing industry standard certifications independently.
Right. You have to make your competence totally undeniable to a system that defaults to skepticism.
And third, you have to actively construct your own social architecture.
To offset that loneliness tax.
Yes, you cannot avoid the loneliness tax forever, but you can distribute the cost. Join specific online communities, seek out mentors, and force yourself to put your unfinished work in front of others for harsh critique.
It's about consciously building the accountability structures that a university just provides by default.
Exactly.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the ultimate shift we are demanding here is a transition from permission to agency.
Agency over your own mind.
Yes, learning is not a passive event. It isn't a service some institution provides to you. It is a lifelong, aggressive pursuit that you execute for yourself.
Beautifully said. We've covered incredible ground today.
We really have.
We started by dismantling the illusion of the paper trail, realizing that a degree is just a map, not the territory of actual capability. We broke down the mechanics of the execution loop, exploring how just-in-time learning leverages dopamine to weave knowledge deeply into the brain.
Right.
We explored the development of metacognition, the heavy emotional toll of the loneliness tax, and, the modern strategies required to translate raw curiosity into real market value.
And we have to remember, in a hyper-accelerated world, the half-life of a formal degree is shrinking rapidly. The technical skills you acquire in year 1 of a university program are often entirely obsolete by year 4.
It's true. The only meta skill that retains compounding value is the discipline to direct your own mind.
Absolutely. Before we sign off, I want to leave you, the learner, with a new angle to ponder.
Let's hear it.
We spent this entire deep dive analyzing how human institutions attempt to validate our learning and how the autodidact overrides those systems. But look at the trajectory of artificial intelligence right now.
If AI eventually becomes a flawless, personalized, interactive tutor for every single human being on Earth, capable of guiding your unique curiosity in real time and testing your blind spots instantly, it could make the entire concept of a standardized curriculum completely obsolete.
Wow.
When everyone has a genius-level mentor in their pocket, how will society even measure expertise tomorrow?
That is a paradigm shift we are barely beginning to comprehend.
Truly. Keep diving deep. Keep questioning the map you've been handed, and never be afraid to chart the territory on your own.